You're watching memorable entertainment television. MeTV Tri-State.
Broke the story on local homestead tax credit fiasco. Expose the Evansville Redevelopment Commission excessive spending habits.
Your community watchdog. CityCountyObserver.com is your online community newspaper dedicated to the progress of Evansville and Vanderburgh County. We're a nonpartisan publication providing insight into political issues and events that shape our community. We are a watchdog for you, the citizen. Check us out online, city-countyobserver.com. That's city-countyobserver.com.
Tri-State Voices, an open discussion with area leaders on issues affecting communities throughout the Tri-State. Now, here's your host, Mike Woods.
Good morning. Welcome to Tri-State Voices. Hi, I'm your host, Mike Woods. Every week, Tri-State Voices interviews a local leader concerning issues that's important to all of us. Today, we're honored to have Steve Locke here. He's the Chief Deputy Coroner of the Vanderburgh County Coroner's Office. Before Steve was with the Vanderburgh County Coroner's Office, he was a detective with the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's for about 20 years. As a detective with the Sheriff's Department, Steve probably saw every kind of case you can imagine, and probably a lot of cases you wouldn't want to imagine. Everything from child molesting, murders, rapes, robberies. He saw it all. Now he's with the coroner, and of course they investigate deaths. Steve, good to see you.
Nice seeing you.
All right. Well, probably the best place for us to start is, would you explain just exactly what the coroner's office does?
Well, the coroner is in charge of determining cause and manner of death for those deaths that involve accidents, homicides, suicides, unexplained or unattended deaths. We do not investigate natural deaths, those that occur in hospitals under a hospital setting, people that die of natural causes.
Okay, now you're the Chief Deputy Coroner. Annie Groves is the coroner. What does the Chief Deputy Coroner do?
I fall directly under her guidance. We run the office. We have 17 deputy coroners. They make runs, we investigate cases, and we make those determinations of cause and manner of death in the office. I also have duties of administrative duties of paying the bills and making sure the schedules are set up and everybody gets paid for their time. Okay, so I think you told me you have 17 part-time people and 4 full-time. Is that right? That is correct. We have 4 full-time people that man the office. We have 17 total deputies that make runs. Our office covers 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Death doesn't take a day off? It does not. Okay. What's the difference really when there's a death between what you do and what the Sheriff's Department does or any other police agency? Well, when we respond to a scene, we typically respond together to a scene. We are notified either by the public or by a police agency that there has been a death. Then we work with the sheriff, police, state police agencies and help them determine a cause and manner of death. We then turn it over to them to make a determination of who is responsible, especially if it's a homicide. They make a determination or investigate the case as far as who's responsible for it. We give them the tools and collect the evidence in which to do that for them. Okay, and then I guess they turn it over to the prosecutor's office, and the prosecutor determines whether or not to file the charges. That's correct, whether there's charges warranted or justifiable in the situation. Okay. And what happens if you don't agree with the police agency or the prosecutor doesn't agree with you or the police? How's that all get sorted out? Well, I haven't had that happen yet. We work together on things, and everybody has an important input in this. Everybody collects evidence, and we sit down and look over and try and create or recreate what happened so we can get a good idea of what happened in a death. Okay. Now, are the records from the coroner's office public? They are not. Autopsy records are only available to the family and to law enforcement. You can't simply walk in the door and collect an autopsy report on someone you don't know or just because you have some curiosity in the case. They are by law restricted. The only people that can get them are law enforcement as part of their investigation and families. There are some other certain circumstances, but anything other than that requires a court order.
Okay. Now, I think you told me that changed after the Dale Earnhardt fiasco, right?
In many states, that was kind of a leading example of why they restricted access in some states to autopsy reports, was that people were simply going in and getting them out of curiosity, and then they end up on the internet, they end up in front of everyone, and those are very private situations, and not everybody needs to see those.
Yeah, I guess in his case there was photos and everything else all over the internet before the family had even been notified.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things that precipitated these laws, were that families come first.
Okay. Now, where is the coroner's office?
The coroner's office is located here in Evansville. It's at 201 South Morton. It's they're off Walnut, over by the Mets bus terminal. We've been there for about 25 years. We have a full staff there. We have offices. We have a histology lab where we do lab studies there. We have x-ray equipment. We have surgical suites. We have storage facilities for the victims. We have records dating back into the 1800s stored there.
Okay, well, what's a histology lab? What kind of work do you do there?
That's primarily looking at microscopic slides of a person's organs or tissues, help determine a cause of death or any disease that's contained within.
So they worried about some communicable disease that could spread? Or?
That is one thing, but it also can show from cancers to other microorganisms that may not be a spreadable disease, but something that could have led to a death.
Okay, because you told me the other day you guys actually had a case of tuberculosis, is that right?
Yes, we had one that came through. We've worked with the health department and the local hospital that treated the patient, and made sure that everybody that had contact was tested, and we don't see that very often. We don't hear about that in this country. Very rare anymore, but it's still out there.
So I guess if you come across a communicable disease like that, you got to spread the word, get a hold of appropriate agencies and try to track it down, or? Yeah,
we make sure that everybody's notified that we had an exposure to that. Very low risk in a autopsy situation from that, but that's not the only disease that we deal with. I mean, anytime we have someone, we have to assume that they have some sort of disease that could be transmitted.
Okay. You said you have an x-ray lab. What's the purpose of the x-ray lab?
We are looking for not only injuries, but we're looking for projectiles, bullets, anything that may have caused the death of a person, to help the doctors recover those. We have it, our x-rays still shoot film in our office. There's probably not a lot of people that have a camera that still shoot film, but we still shoot film there. It's kind of tough to find people that know how to operate and load film anymore because everybody shoots digital, but we still have a good group of x-ray techs that come in and man our x-ray unit and do a good job.
Now, you said you have a surgery suite for autopsies.
Yes.
Okay, who conducts the actual autopsies?
By state law in Indiana, autopsies are to be conducted by a board-certified pathologist. So they have to go through med school, then they have to become a pathologist. Our particular doctor is a pathologist and an attorney. So he's gone through quite a bit of school as far as related to not only making a cause and determination of death, but being able to present that in court or to the prosecutor's office on how it should be done. We, in the state of Indiana, the doctors that are used by local coroner's offices are contracted in. There's very few, there's probably probably less than 10 in Indiana that actually know or are qualified to conduct autopsies.
Okay, so how big of an area do they bring bodies to Evansville for?
The Vanderburgh County Morgue has a contract spread of about 37 counties. We cover all the way through southern Illinois and southern Indiana. They have a the ability to bring their victims to our morgue. And we get them from as far away as all the way down in the corner of Illinois near Paducah. We'll bring them, and all the way across southern Indiana. At various times we'll get those brought in. We charge a $100 morgue fee to those counties, so it's a really good deal for them. And that was part of the original agreement when they built our morgue, so they could build a single regional morgue, which would be operated by Vanderburgh County but utilized by the surrounding counties.
I guess the smaller counties, it just wouldn't make any sense to try to have a morgue and a pathologist and all the rest of it for a county that only had 15,000 people.
Right. I mean, some of the smaller counties, it just doesn't make fiscal sense to try and open up and operate a morgue for the few deaths that they have a year.
Okay. You guys also have storage facilities, both short-term and long-term, is that right? That's
correct. We have a large refrigeration system. We have also a freezer system for not only victims' remains, but also for tissue and evidence that we collect during these cases that we store there. Generally, people don't stay there that long. Generally within 2 to 3 days, the victim is gone. We don't generally have someone sitting around for a very long time.
Why would you have somebody sitting there very long?
Well, if they were unidentified, part of the duties of the coroner is to identify the person. One of the most important aspects of it is to identify and notify family. We can do that with various means. We can use DNA, fingerprints, we use family identification, we use dental records. All of those things, though, indicate in some way we know who the person is. In order to get a match on dental records, you're going to have to basically know who they are or suspect who they are so you can go get their dental records. With DNA, somewhat of the same way. And with fingerprints, we can do some searching with fingerprints for unidentified persons, but that person would have had to have been arrested at some point in their life. If you had never been arrested, you're not going to have fingerprints on file.
Okay.
So we also utilize medical devices. We've made numerous identifications with hip replacements. Those have serial numbers on them, so we were able to find records relating to that being placed in somebody. We've made with pacemakers and other plates. We've, a lot of orthopedic placements. A lot of people have orthopedic surgery, and we can do identification.
How often do you ever get a case where you just simply can't identify the body?
We have not had any cases where since I have been there, where we have not been able to identify someone. About once a month we have a case that comes in that requires a little more detective work to find out who they are or confirm who they are, and that's utilizing either DNA, dental, or fingerprints.
Now you talked earlier about the pathologist who does the autopsy. When they actually do an autopsy on somebody, what actually goes on there?
Well, it is a surgical procedure, and they are looking at every aspect of the victim, and we cover from head to toe. Any injuries are documented, any surgical or medical intervention is documented, any old surgical scars, any injuries or something wrong with them. We also look at the basics of eye color, hair color, whether they have teeth or not, and that such. And then they're examined internally. And it's a medical procedure, and the doctor looks at the person looking for any disease factors that may have caused their death.
Well, when do they require an autopsy? Because most people don't have an autopsy, is that right?
That's correct. In Vanderburgh County, we have roughly 2,500 people a year die. Of those 2,500, about 350 become coroner's cases. Of those, about half of those end up autopsied. When a person passes away, the determination of whether an autopsy is done or not is made by my office. We definitely take in an account the family's wishes, religious aspects of it or objections to it, but it all ends with us in making that determination. When we do an autopsy or don't do an autopsy, we have to look at maybe someone's been in a hospital for a week and we have a lot of medical records. And so we know that they were involved in a car wreck and they suffered a head injury, and we know that's what ultimately caused their death. In those cases, generally we do not do an autopsy.
The bottom line, though, as I understand it, if you want to do an autopsy, even if the family objects, you're going to do an autopsy. We
have constitutional and statutory duties in which to do that, to make that cause and determination. In almost every incident, after we explain that to a family, they understand it. They understand it even more 6 months later. Yeah. When they get answers that they otherwise would not have gotten without that.
But the bottom line is, even if they have religious objections and that sort of thing, if you think there's a need to investigate, you're going to go forth with it.
That's correct. And we work very well with all the different religious aspects that we are confronted with, and we've never had anybody that has felt afterwards that we didn't respect them.
Okay. How do you handle it? I was always curious. So you get a call and they find a body. You don't know if it's murder, you don't know if it's suicide, natural death, accident, no matter what. And so you get the call and you come up on the scene. I mean, what's the first thing you do?
Well, many times we are the last people to arrive. The fire department or EMS has been called, or law enforcement has been called. They then notify us that they believe they've made a discovery of a deceased person. We respond and then we work with them. It can be a long drawn out event, especially if it's a complicated crime scene. You want to make sure you don't destroy any evidence while you're at the scene. And so we make sure, and it can be very painstaking time to make sure that we collect everything that we can get at that scene and it's done right the first time.
Do you put on any protective clothing? You know, earlier you said you guys had a case where somebody had tuberculosis. When you approach the body, do you wear some kind of a suit or anything? Or?
Well, every scene is different. The scenes all pose different hazards. A fire scene or an accident scene may in of itself be dangerous. You may have collapsed floors, you may have vehicle fires or chemical spills. So every scene is different, and we dress or suit appropriately for every scene. Okay. And sometimes their scenes are too dangerous for us to enter, and we have to ask for the assistance of the experts that can deal with that. The fire departments are very good at knowing when the scene is too dangerous to go in, and they actually may have to do the retrieval and the removal for us.
I know you've gone into a couple scenes that were just horrific. I mean, you had the C-130 out at the Drury End a few years ago, and then we had the tornado. In both these cases, just massive numbers of people killed and injured. What's it like to deal with that kind of a scene? How do you go in there? Because you got to secure the area. You need to do an investigation. You got injured people. You've got people that they're dead. You've got property all over the place.
Well, and I think every one of those scenes, when they come upon us, is treating the injured as the primary concern and making sure everybody's safe, and then we come in from that standpoint. Both of those scenes were terrible outcomes for many families, and they really impacted the whole entire community. But I can tell you from being at both scenes that the level of caring and commitment by the community was just very uplifting. I mean, the tornado site, to see people helping people out there was unbelievable. Nobody complaining, nobody asking what can be done for me. It was all how I can help. And we had to be careful out there asking for stuff because you got it.
Well, who's in charge? Like in the tornado thing, you've got all these different agencies out there. Who's actually in charge?
We all in this type of service follow a chain of command, a command center. I know that it will be, and you ultimately have a single commander out there, whether it's the police or fire, and you have a command center in which each agency will have a representative within that agency. So when a call for a certain assistance is needed, then it's made sure that the agency that can provide that is available or can respond. Whether it's they found someone who is deceased, or they found someone that's injured, or they have found a dangerous gas leak or another fire, they make sure that that appropriate agency responds.
I think you told me one time when you were out at the scene of the tornado, there were guns all over the place. I mean, you got everybody's possessions, but one of the problems was just collecting all these guns.
Right, and then those were one of the aspects that were somewhat unexpected, that we want to make sure nobody else gets hurt. That once the tornado has gone through, it has caused the amount of damage that it's going to cause. We want to make sure from then on we help people, and we make sure that nobody else gets hurt. And those guns laying around were something that I didn't expect to see when we went out there. But if you think logically about it, of course there's going to be all kinds of things out there. If you take somebody's home and their possessions and simply throw them everywhere, everything they own is going to be out there.
Yeah, just one more thing to deal with, I guess. When you've got all these different kinds of cases, and I was curious how you deal with, say, an accidental case. You come there and it's pretty clear it's an accident, all right? Do you have to report that to OSHA or to or some other governmental agency, or how do you deal with that?
It depends, and then we have to make sure that it's an accident. That's one of our jobs. Was there an event that precipitated this accident? Did the person have a medical event and then have a car wreck? Or were they at work working with heavy machinery and have some sort of medical event that caused them to have a secondary accident? So we have to look at that from the family's point of view, and from a legal point of view, finding out whether someone was injured as a result of the accident, or that came after they had a catastrophic medical event.
So you might be bringing in any number of different governmental agencies, I guess.
Yes, and we work with them all, and they all bring in a bit of knowledge with them, especially in industrial accidents. You may have OSHA or some safety organizations that come in and can explain to us the type of machinery that was involved, and that how someone would become either entangled or injured from that machine.
How big of a problem is prescription drug deaths in this area?
Right now, that's our #1 category of death. I think it's something that people are slowly becoming aware of. The last couple of years, they have been our #1 cause even over auto accidents. I think,
and we're talking about legal drugs right now.
We're talking about people that have obtained these legally. Last year we had 46 deaths regarding prescription drug overdoses. All of these people obtained their medications legally. They were taking them not as prescribed. And I think people have a misconception that if it's a prescription medication that it's safe, and it can end up to being not safe when you mix those together and then overtake them.
Okay, were they people that really needed the medicines, or were they people that didn't need the medicines, or can you really tell?
Well, that's always a question to be asking the doctors, and many people doctor shop. I think that's become somewhat of a slang term that everybody's familiar with, that people go out and they go to multiple doctors for the same sickness or injury or complaint, and they will obtain medications from each doctor. And that's always been a problem. We live in a geographical area that we have Illinois and Kentucky almost equal distance from us, so people can readily cross state lines to seek other doctors or other treatment other places. We most of the time find people have accessed these medications through multiple doctors, not just a single provider.
Now there's a system, an inspect system, that try to deal with some of the doctor shopping, is that right?
Yeah, Indiana has a pharmaceutical records keeping system. It's called Inspect. Doctors have access to it, dentists and pharmacies and coroner's offices, or the law enforcement in cases where there's an active investigation. We can simply run someone's name and it will give us a list of all the narcotics that they've been prescribed and those prescribers that have given them. And doctors have that too. So if they have a patient that comes in to see them, they can run that patient's name and find out whether they're obtaining narcotics from some other doctor or some other provider.
Okay. And obviously you guys deal in a lot of suicides.
Yes, and that's always been a focus of our office, is to try and reduce this. We want to make sure that everybody that needs help or is somewhat suffering or thinking of this gets a hold of somebody and tells somebody. And if someone has somebody in their family that they think is struggling, ask them and get them some help.
Well, if somebody dies of a drug overdose, how do you know if that's just an accidental overdose or if that's a suicide?
Well, we, in all of our cases, do what's called a psychological autopsy also. Showing someone just physically has died from an overdose is one thing. Looking at their state of mind before they actually went into that situation is another. And we do that on these cases. It's set up, the questions are set up by psychiatrists and continue to evolve as we do, and they lead us directly into the path of whether this person did this intentionally or accidentally.
Seems like it'd be really subjective. I mean, some people are really quiet about what they're going to do in life, and some people talk and never carry it out, and so it's trying to read the dead person's mind, really.
And that's true, and I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that everybody leaves a note. Notes are very rare. We very seldom do get a note. There are less common than common, and sometimes the notes don't actually, we call them more of notes of despair. Mm-hmm. And other times we don't know when they've been written.
Now you started with the Sheriff's Department before there was DNA, and of course now you guys do that a lot. I mean, how much has that changed your job as an investigator?
Well, it's changed it a great deal. Many cases that used to be left unsolved are now being solved because of the way DNA has revolutionized investigation. It's also been very good at confirmatory and exclusionary in cases where you can, when you say you investigate it, you want to make sure that you put the right person in jail.
Okay.
And so, you know, you not only you want to put the right person in jail, but you want to make sure the wrong person doesn't go to jail.
Okay. Your job's got to be really emotional. I mean, how do you walk up to a family member and somebody's got to tell them? How do you do that?
That's one of the toughest aspects of our job. We want to make sure that when we get there, that we don't make it worse. It's a terrible, terrible situation. And that contact with the family is only one of many. We have a long, long history of repeated contacts with families over months and months and months, trying to help them get through that terrible day.
Steve, we only have about 30 seconds left, and I guess the final question I'd like to ask you is, you clearly enjoy your job, you're passionate about it, and even though sometimes you don't like to admit it, most people say you're probably going to be running for a coroner in a couple of years because Annie Groves can't run again. She's barred by law. Why do you want to continue doing this job?
Well, it really does fit what I've done all my life, and that's the investigative aspect. And I don't want to say I enjoy the job. That's always a scary thing when you think that people's tragedy, but I do believe I can help, and I believe I can do a good job, and I think that I can help these people through the worst day of their lives.
Well, we're grateful you're here when we need you. Thank you. We appreciate you being here, Steve. Thank you for watching our show. Next week, we're going to have another law enforcement official, the Vanderburgh County prosecutor, Nick Herman. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
You're watching memorable entertainment television. MeTV Tri-State.